Hello to all astrology enthusiasts. Today I want to discuss the upcoming full moon in the sign of Sagittarius, which will take place on June 11, 2025 at the 21st degree, and the astrological event itself will occur at 10:43 in the morning. At the same time, it will close the period that began on December 1, 2024. The waning moon will be in effect until June 25, 2025. That is until the next new moon. Now, let's go over the features of this full moon one by one. I'd like to point out that in astrology, a full moon is essentially an astrological event that creates a moment of maximum light tension between the sun and the moon in our lives. That is, it's between our consciousness and subconsciousness, if we look at it through the lens of astrology. And here, the moon is fully illuminated. It is opposite, in opposition to the sun. Naturally, during this period, we clearly gain some understanding of a specific situation or of some kind of interaction or relationship. So the full moon in our lives always brings a culmination, marks the completion of a certain cycle, and reveals hidden topics, emotions, or situations that have been concealed in our lives for a certain period of time. And under the influence of the full moon, our intuition becomes much sharper and our emotional sensitivity increases significantly. We experience internal conflicts that all come to the surface. They demand our awareness and require resolution. And overall, the full moon kind of balances the energies in our lives. It very often brings sudden turns, insights, moments of truth and clarity. It pushes us to sum things up and make important conclusions in life. And during this time, of course, our actions and decisions take on increased significance. And in the area of life where the full moon occurs, it's necessary to eliminate this imbalance, to balance the energies there, so to speak, and to bring certain life processes to completion. And the full moon helps us reveal exactly what and in which area of life this is happening. It's also important to know in which house of your horoscope the full moon occurs according to your natal chart, so you can understand which area of your life it activates. Now, let's pay attention to the particular features of a full moon, specifically in the sign of Sagittarius. After all, every full moon and every new moon occurs in different zodiac signs, and accordingly, each sign adds its own layer of energy, which manifests in our lives and activates certain specific themes in our lives. Accordingly, a full moon in Sagittarius brings a very strong emphasis on themes of freedom, the search for meaning in life, and the expansion of our horizons, our worldview, and our overall perspective. In other words, the energy of Sagittarius is connected with philosophy, travel, learning, and spiritual growth in our lives. That's why during this period, we often feel a desire to break out of our usual routine, to find some new ideas, new perspectives, and to rethink our life goals. And a full moon in this sign, of course, stimulates this inner need for sincerity and honesty with ourselves and with others, and encourages active movement toward our dreams. After all, it's symbolic, the 9th house of the horoscope. But it can also manifest as a tendency toward excessive optimism, since it is ruled by Jupiter. It can lead to hasty conclusions or overestimating one's abilities. And here it's very important to maintain a balance between the inspiration we receive during this full moon and reality. In other words, this is a period that is excellent for completing projects related to education, travel, the study of philosophy, religion, or various spiritual practices. It also helps us get rid of certain limiting beliefs in our lives. And naturally, the full moon will manifest itself. In other words, the energies of the full moon will show up at different levels of our lives in various processes, situations, and interactions. For example, if we're talking about the mental level, then here the energies of the Sagittarius full moon, they may be in Sagittarius, can manifest as an increased interest in new knowledge and in broadening one's horizons. As I mentioned, the mental level is all about our consciousness, our mind, and our thoughts. We become more curious and open to new ideas. We are ready to discuss worldview topics, and we are eager to seek deeper meaning in events. And here, our mental activity is very intense. In other words, we want to understand why certain things happen in our lives and to find a broader context for our own life. That is, to expand our horizons, to broaden specifically the boundaries of our personal worldview. If we talk about the emotional level, then the energy and the full moon in Sagittarius on the emotional level manifests as a feeling of the need for freedom and independence. After all, this is Sagittarius. There is a desire to express your true feelings without restrictions. This is a moment when very strong emotions surface which are connected either with expectations or with disappointments in personal ideals. Because once again, I'll say that this is the 9th house and it's about dreams, about ideals, about something elevated in our lives. And here, emotions are very often colored by optimism and enthusiasm, Jupiterian energy, but at the same time, they can also create internal conflicts between the desire for security and simultaneously the desire for adventure, since it is still Sagittarius. And if we talk about the physical manifestation, then a full moon in Sagittarius on the physical level can show up as increased energy, activity, a desire to move, travel, relocate, play sports, any kind of movement that seems to expand space and gives us a sense of freedom. But because there is heightened emotional and mental tension here, it can also lead to nervous overstimulation on the physical level or fatigue, or there may be problems with balancing rest and activity. And in order not to burn out, of course, it's important to ground yourself, to use relaxing practices such as breathing exercises, yoga, or meditation. And overall, the full moon in Sagittarius can manifest both positively and negatively. That is, we can experience these energies in very different ways, either benefiting from them or, on the contrary, experiencing them to our own detriment. If we look at the positive manifestations of the full moon energy in Sagittarius, it can be about expanding consciousness and gaining new knowledge. In other words, this is a very good period when we can open up new horizons in our lives. Mentally, we may feel a strong pull towards studying philosophy, religion, and the cultures of other peoples and countries. We are drawn to travel, which gives us a kind of living experience and inspiration. And during this time, we easily absorb any information and can use it specifically for our own development. If we talk about another topic, such as the idea of a belief system or worldview, it becomes easier for us to express our thoughts. We want to share information. We want to build trusting relationships with people, to find like-minded individuals who share these beliefs, our attitudes, and some of our ideals. And overall, considering that this full moon is ruled by Jupiter, it is, of course, about optimism and faith in a better future. Plus, here we may feel, so to speak, a lot of hope and enthusiasm, and this is certainly a very powerful resource for starting things that specifically require self-belief and courage. This is a good time to launch projects related to education, some kind of spiritual quest or journey, or cultural initiatives. That is, the full moon can bring, so to speak, a realization that we are ready to start such initiatives. and naturally the theme of breaking free from limitations. That is, the full moon is very often accompanied by the realization that all patterns of thinking or certain fears are holding us back, hindering our development. And it is precisely during the full moon in Sagittarius that it becomes very easy to let go of such blocks, internal limitations and stereotypes that have been restricting our freedom. The negative manifestations of the Sagittarius full moon can be expressed through excessive optimism or a certain impulsiveness. We may make decisions very quickly based on a superficial perspective or on excessive, so to speak, faith. And naturally, on the downside, this can lead to unrealistic expectations and certain disappointments simply because we didn't think through the details. We simply rushed, got flustered, and in addition, on the negative side, it can lead to stubbornness and imposing one's opinions. In other words, there may be a strong desire to be heard, to be right. And of course, this creates conflict situations and arguments. That is when we are not willing to accept someone else's point of view. On the negative side, fanaticism can also manifest here a desire to impose your own beliefs without respecting the opinions of others. On the negative side, it can also create a feeling of inner limitation. That is, there is a striving for freedom, but because some things cannot be realized immediately, anxiety, for example, may intensify. And of course, this leads to irritability, a certain nervousness, and causes emotional tension. And also on the negative side, as I mentioned, it's excessive activity without rest. That is, physically or mentally, we can overdo it. We can try to do everything at once. Naturally, this leads to exhaustion. Naturally, this causes stress and a loss of energy. And here it's very important to maintain the right balance and relaxation in order to avoid emotional burnout. Another significant point that occurs during the full moon in Sagittarius is that the ruler of this full moon, Jupiter, is in a transitional state, moving into a new zodiac sign at the moment of the full moon. Let me remind you that Jupiter changes signs once a year, and precisely on June 9th, 2 days before the full moon, Jupiter moves into Cancer, and this shifts the focus. It gives the energy of the full moon a completely new, so to speak, mood. And Jupiter, considering that it is the planet of expansion, growth, and luck, here in the new sign in Cancer, shifts the focus from the external world to internal, emotional, and domestic matters. To be continued. In Cancer, Jupiter operates through the prism of feelings, certain family and ancestral values, the theme of care, and the strengthening of emotional security in particular. And of course, here it will manifest its influence by activating themes of expansion and growth, specifically through strengthening family ties, ancestral stories, domestic connections, through receiving emotional support from close relatives, and the desire to create a cozy atmosphere. In other words, here the energy works in such a way that success comes into our lives specifically through showing care to loved ones or receiving care from them, developing one's own nest. This could mean starting a family or having a child. Here there is a strengthening of inner resources precisely through the support of one's family and lineage. And for example, instead of seeking external adventures or embarking on some grand spiritual quest, we will tend to look for meaning and growth specifically by immersing ourselves in these family and ancestral stories, by creating emotional stability and security in our lives, because once again, these are family-related themes. In addition, Jupiter in Cancer enhances intuition. It increases our emotional sensitivity, and this will help us make important decisions, not only rationally, but also on a feeling level, even relying on intuition. Because, let me remind you, the moon rules the sign of Cancer, right? The moon is responsible for the subconscious, for feelings, sensations, and emotions. In addition, here we may see successes and opportunities for growth in areas related to real estate, family business, raising children, matters of motherhood, and as I mentioned, the birth of a family or a child. On the downside, Jupiter here can sometimes lead to a tendency toward excessive sentimentality or getting stuck on certain past events, emotional dependencies, or childhood issues. Here, it is very important not to get bogged down in nostalgia, not to withdraw or become fixated. Instead, you should focus on your future. And overall, with a full moon in Sagittarius and Jupiter in Cancer, we get a balance between the thirst for freedom, the expansion of our perspectives, and the need to take care of ourselves, our family, our roots, our home, and our emotional well-being. In other words, this is an energy that combines our global, far-reaching ideas about life with the warmth and support of our loved ones. And here we can really rely on our inner resources, on our sense of security within ourselves. Of course, we will take a closer look at Jupiter's transit through Cancer in separate videos on the channel. Now I want to discuss with you the symbolism of the degrees that are activated by this full moon in Sagittarius. That is the 21st degree of Sagittarius, and it is represented to us as an image or a picture of a child and a dogged child who has put on someone else's glasses. And here there is a very important metaphor. A metaphor connected to our development through play, through the theme of imitation and imagination. This image reveals to us that childlike naivety, which merges with our intuition in order for us to grow personally. The idea is to put on someone else's glasses. And these characters, in this image as it were, try on a completely new level of consciousness, which does not yet belong to them, but to which they aspire. In other words, the direction of development is that they strive for this. The key idea of this symbol is that growth happens through playing at being your future self. That is, we kind of accelerate personal evolution when we allow ourselves to pretend, to model, to imagine ourselves in a role that does not yet fit us. But it is precisely this state that triggers a new stage in our personal development. And here in this symbol, the glasses appear as a symbol of vision and awareness. In other words, to put on someone else's glasses means to try to see the world through the eyes of a more mature, wise, and developed person. So it's an act of curiosity, a striving for understanding, even if that understanding hasn't actually been achieved yet. The image of the child and the dog. Here, the child symbolizes naivety, openness to learning, and a readiness to play. And the dog is a symbol of loyalty, representing an instinctive nature and an expression of deep trust in the process of our lives. Together, they seem to tell us that even without full awareness or the necessary level of intellect, the soul naturally strives for growth through imitation, through trust, or through play. Now, let's return to the point of the new moon. The new moon in Sagittarius, which we had on the 1st of December 2024, and it was in the 10th degree of Sagittarius. What is the 10th degree about? It is the image and symbol of a theatrical performance of the goddess of happiness and fortune. So this is the picture presented before us, indeed in front of us, and it reveals very deep processes of our social motivation, our ambitions, and how culture influences us personally in a significant way. The key idea of this symbol here is that society not only inspires us, but also programs us for something through images of success, beauty, and fortune. In other words, these are the very goddesses of prosperity. They are somewhat mythologized, somewhat idealized, and they manifest themselves through the media, for example, or through certain traditions, customs, or cultural expressions such as theater and festivals. But what is the essence of this symbol? It is about external stimulation of our growth through the image of what is desired. That is, success, happiness, and luck are presented to us as a reward. But the image itself is a performance, and this goddess is the archetype of an attractive goal. But behind her lies an entire drama, and sometimes even manipulation. This is about how society creates an illusion of achievement for us so that we channel our energy in the direction that is beneficial specifically to society. This could be careerism, consumerism, competition, or some kind of desired recognition in society. How can this manifest in life? That is, we might chase after a beautiful image of success without realizing that, in a way, it doesn't really belong to us. Or our ambitions may intensify if, for example, the image of the goddess of fortune seems especially attainable. But this can definitely be a trap. Or society shapes this through culture, through advertising, or through show business stage that, in a way, tries to lure each of us in. And here we either play along and get involved in these processes, or we start to become aware of the ongoing performance. The potential energy of this symbol lies in the fact that if each of us understands that everything happening is nothing more than a performance, then we can use this stimulus consciously. In other words, we can see our goals clearly, we can avoid being deceived, and at the same time continue to grow personally. This symbol also teaches us to distinguish between external and internal motivation, to recognize where our real goal lies and where it is just an imposed role. It also gives us a push toward an honest look at our desires. Is this what I want, or is it what others expect or want from me, right? So, what is important to understand here? It is important here to use external images as inspiration, but not to substitute them for your true aspiration. It is important here to be aware of when we are being led by things like advertising, and when it is our soul guiding us, specifically the aspiration of our soul. It is important here to turn this spectacle into a conscious game. In this way, the symbol of this degree teaches us to manage our ambitions while not losing our personal identity, so to speak, amid all these bright promises from the world. If we combine these two symbols, that is, both the process of the new moon and the full moon in Sagittarius, then, to sum up, we can say that our path of development can begin with a very striking external image. In other words, this very theatrical idea of the goddess of fortune, a symbol of some ideal that we want to strive for. More often, this is an external ideal. And this is a stage of motivation through some kind of social projections of success, when we get carried away by this picture, the image of well-being. We are inspired by external images of happiness, fame, fortune, and recognition. But this is only an outward showcase. It's a game, social mask. And at a certain point in life, it simply serves as a stimulus for movement. But it does not guarantee us real personal growth. And by the time of the full moon in Sagittarius, which is already happening at the 21st degree, we are supposed to go through a process of evolution. That is, we need to realize this desire of ours to go beyond imitation and stereotypes. And the symbol of the child and the dog putting on someone else's glasses tells us that through play, through imagination, or even through pretending, we can experience these states without getting involved in these social processes or these external social motivation. This is a very important phase of learning through imitation, through experimentation, through modeling, which allows us to internally experience these states and move on to a new, so to speak, level of personal growth. And so the path goes, as it were, from an inspiring external superficial image to a very deep internal process of maturation, when we are no longer just striving for some ideal, but begin to embody it from within, from a state of inner motivation. At first, this may be very tentative and playful. This is the kind of journey we need to make from the new moon to the full moon in Sagittarius. I would also like to draw your attention to a number of significant aspects that will be at play during the full moon in Sagittarius. And one of the main aspects is that the Sun will be in conjunction with the ruler of the full moon, Jupiter, which will already be in the sign of Cancer. This is a very interesting aspect that will intensify our drive for protection, care, and the desire to build a solid foundation, for example, in the form of starting a family, or to create an inner state of emotional well-being and inner balance. In other words, the energy of this aspect gives us the opportunity for deep emotional growth, or the possibility and chance to expand, even for us to expand through a sense of belonging, kinship, or roots. Here there may be a very strong desire to strengthen your home, improve the atmosphere at home, support your loved ones, and create a truly safe space for yourself and others. It is important here to honor traditions, strengthen family ties, and respect family history. In other words, the energy of this aspect can manifest, for example, as the growth of emotional maturity, or through real actions such as buying property, starting a family, taking care of parents, the topic of raising children, or even simply the birth of a child. So this is an aspect of great emotional generosity, which allows us to treat our own feelings and the feelings of our loved ones with great care. What else? I really like that during this period, Venus will already be in Taurus and Mars will be preparing to move into Virgo. In other words, our personal planets will become more grounded. This will also contribute to the creation of tangible things in our lives, such as starting a family, having children, buying property, or moving to a new place. But we'll talk about that in additional videos. Returning to the aspect, I'll add that the conjunction of the Sun and Jupiter can also bring situations where we see breakthroughs in education or in certain creative projects. So there will be a lot of inspiration here, rooted in personal stories, traditions, and family values. For example, we might receive new offers related to education, launch some online courses, write a book, or feel a strong desire to share our knowledge publicly. And the full moon in Sagittarius will help us see exactly where all of this can lead. And here the bigger goal will become clear. In this aspect, situations may arise related to issues of home, immigration, or expanding your personal space, specifically your living situation. So this includes topics like moving, expanding your family, obtaining citizenship, or investing in real estate. And the full moon in Sagittarius will serve as an impetus for making this major decision to leave your comfort zone and move toward fulfilling your dream. These are situations where there will be increased social activity or a display of leadership. So this is about public speaking, launching blogs or podcasts, social initiatives, teaching activities, or cultural events that are somehow connected to personal experience, family, or topics related to upbringing. Also, there may be situations involving conflict where we are faced with a choice, for example, whether to leave or stay, to step out of our comfort zone or maintain our stability. There will be situations here where opportunities arise to expand your audience and influence them specifically through your personal values. In other words, you can convey your ideas through words, posts, or lectures. The only thing is that the full moon will show us how much our personal truth resonates with other people. It's a great time to present certain things, for example, books, or to publicly defend projects, or to reach a new audience. This aspect will provide exactly these kinds of opportunities. The moon will be in a trine with Mars in Leo, and this aspect brings a very vivid, inspiring energy and a combination of fiery elements. Thank you. This is about a passion for action, about emotional courage, about the desire to express oneself. That's the kind of energy we're talking about. It pushes us toward actively expressing our feelings, taking decisive actions and steps, especially in those areas of life where it's necessary to show leadership and believe in yourself. It's a very good time to ignite and inspire others, to speak publicly, to start something new, a new project, to confess your feelings, or to make a bold gesture. Here, there is a true harmony between our emotions and our actions. And this gives us confidence, it gives us an inner sense of composure, it gives us drive and helps us stand up for our ideas and desires very gently yet persistently. In other words, it's a really great impulse to act, one that comes from a strong inner response. That is, we might feel, this is it, I know exactly what needs to be done, and immediately go and do it. This is the aspect where emotions become fuel. It can especially manifest in creativity, in defending your beliefs, or in showing leadership. And of course, this aspect is great for starting public initiatives, making announcements, launching or starting presentations, or conducting filming. This aspect can also create a strong desire to break free from routine, from limitations, and simply physically go on a trip. It could be a spontaneous trip, some kind of a sports activity, short journeys, hiking, dancing, anything that gives a sense of freedom and strength. And let me remind you once again that this is still a trine between fire signs. It's about passion, directness, and the desire to have everything at once. So this can create situations where we receive sincere confessions or bursts of love. And this can manifest both positively and negatively. In other words, it can bring about both intensification and tension. But a conflict situation in itself is more likely to provide a release rather than distraction. And of course, it's a good time for physical activity. You should definitely use this aspect to your advantage. There's also another small but very significant aspect, the aspect between the moon and Chiron in Aries. Again, this is a trine, and it's a very gentle, supportive energy that will give us the opportunity to heal a situation or certain relationships through a state of honesty and courage. Since the moon in general is about emotional depth and feelings, and Chiron in Aries is about bravery and at the same time vulnerability. This is a moment when we can be ourselves, even if we are experiencing deep emotional pain. Naturally, this aspect will bring situations where we experience emotional relief and release from some old pain. For example, if something used to hurt us before, maybe some resentment or conflict, Now it's as if we gain a higher perspective on the specific situation, a philosophical understanding of why everything happened the way it did. This is a very good time to forgive yourself or others, especially in some painful or distressing situation. There will be honest conversations that will help heal relationships. In other words, emotions here will be expressed very directly but gently. Here, so to speak, you can talk about some pain without fear of judgment, personal conversations, talks with friends, a partner, or parents. This aspect helps us heal some pain through sincerity, respect, and honesty. And overall, it gives us the courage to be vulnerable. That is, there is an impulse here, a kind of inner drive or motivation, as if manifesting or expressing the deep belief that you truly have the right to be yourself, to exist authentically, and to fully experience and acknowledge everything you feel without judgment or suppression. This includes not only positive emotions, but also negative states, such as emotional pain, sadness, frustration. And this aspect will allow us to heal, so to speak, these energetic knots of resentment, fears, and painful sensations. And you'll also feel the desire to help others specifically through your own personal experience of pain. That is, by sharing your own stories and thus supporting other people. We also have a sextile between Mercury in Cancer and Venus in Taurus during the full moon in Sagittarius. So here there is an interaction between the planet of thought and the planet of feelings, beauty, and values. And this aspect can create situations where we have a lot of heartfelt conversations and warm communication. In other words, we can talk very calmly about feelings, money, relationships, home, and family gently and with care, but also to the point. For example, there may be conversations with a partner or a loved one that bring us closer together. There could be warm exchanges, nostalgic dialogues, or for instance, situations where we discuss creative or financial topics with friends or colleagues. Also, this is about writing letters, such as love messages to friends and family, blogs, making great presentations, creating cool packaging, and creating and producing awesome content that is filled with this kind of heartfelt warmth. It's a great time for creating designs with an emotional undertone. This could be wedding invitations, photo albums, or cozy, visual projects. Also, this aspect can bring situations where we can calmly discuss financial matters related to the home and comfort. Or we might make a pleasant and useful purchase that really suits us, aligns with our values, and of course brings us joy. We can plan our budget, we can invest in things that bring us happiness and a sense of coziness. In addition, this aspect can mark the beginning of a new partnership or alliance, whether in personal or business life, a proposal for cooperation or the creation of a very pleasant atmosphere, for example, in a couple or in a business interaction. And here, this aspect gives us a moment when we show more tenderness, when there is greater physical harmony, which is especially noticeable in romantic relationships. It's also a good time to get massages, see therapists, or practice singing. In other words, this aspect works very much to our advantage. Among the significant and long-lasting aspects, I want to draw your attention to the conjunction of Saturn and Neptune in Aries. Let me remind you that this is a very rare, very powerful, and truly transformative event. And right now, this conjunction will not be complete yet, but in 2026, there will be a full, exact conjunction. However, even now, we can already feel the energies of this astrological event. And here, this conjunction, this aspect, it unitacit brings together two energies that are very opposite in nature. So let me remind you that Saturn is like the architect of structure in our lives, of reality, of boundaries, and of responsibility. Neptune, on the other hand, dissolves everything. It symbolizes dreams, it dissolves. It's about mysticism, inspiration, and our faith. And the sign of Aries, a fire sign, represents a major beginning, the impulse to express our will and our actions. It's about our identity. And of course, the conjunction here gives a very powerful push to reset our meaning, specifically the meanings behind our actions, and to form an entirely new reality where this intersection of structure and intuition takes place. And considering that this is a long-lasting aspect, we can already feel that the construction has begun, the real building of our dream, the materialization of some of our subtle visions. That is, Saturn gives us form, yes, in our lives. And what used to be just a fantasy, some inspiration, or our intuition is now slowly but surely turning into a real project. And naturally, this requires discipline, a willingness to overcome obstacles, yes. That's Saturn's on patience, yes, for realization. But with this aspect, it is especially good to launch spiritual, artistic, or humanitarian projects, to create a new reality in business, education, or the social sphere. That is, here we experience a real collapse of our illusions, and there arises a need to rebuild ourselves from scratch. And so might experience an identity crisis here, but at the same time, we begin to realize that it's time to build our true selves, or to create a new version of ourselves, relying on an inner core. Aries is the sign of action. And here, two archetypes come together. These are our inner teacher and our mystic. It's a very long-lasting process and quite a contradictory one. But gradually, of course, we will understand in what form this will manifest in each of our lives. And there's another somewhat challenging aspect, but also a very long-term one, the square between Jupiter in Cancer and Saturn in Aries. A tense aspect, two social planets, two social giants. Jupiter is about expansion, about fate, about opportunities, while Saturn is about limitations, about structure, about responsibility. And the square shows us the internal struggle between our desire for growth and the need for discipline. Between our desire, let's say, for protection and care, according to the sign of Cancer, and the need to act and manifest, to manifest ourselves independently. That's the Aries part. So the main energy of this aspect is, I want to grow, but something is holding me back. I have to move forward, but I'm afraid of losing stability. And here, situations are possible where there will be a conflict between the theme of security and the theme of self-realization. There may be situations when it's time to step out of a certain comfort zone. For example, this is like the situation when we leave our childhood home, for instance. Of course, this naturally involves very significant and important processes of truly experiencing, as well as deeply living through all of these complex emotions. There may be situations when our ideas run into very strict limitations, or when we are counting on some support, but end up having to rely only on ourselves. In other words, we are, so to speak, forced to create some kind of structure for our dream, but it's important to understand that not everything will work out right away. Not everything will succeed immediately. And we need to move very consistently toward realizing our dream. In the next video, we will discuss the effects of the full moon in Sagittarius for each of the 12 zodiac signs. I wish you success. Subscribe, like, and share this video. Bye-bye.